Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's LJC event with Ryan. For those of you who don't know me, let me introduce myself. My name is Abby. I work with the LJC and the other 15-ish communities, which are run by RecWorks, completely free for all our members. We are a tech recruitment company with a massive difference. As a company, obviously, we're always on the lookout for more clients, and some of our best clients have come from community members who recommended RecWorks to their internal talent teams. So if you're hiring for a new team or you're working for a company that is, please do let us know. If you want to know more about what we can offer, just ping me a message on LinkedIn or Slack or Twitter. My name is as you see it on the screen, and we really look forward to working with you. So what's the difference, I hear you ask? Well, also, we really do believe that recruitment can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development. And that's where all our communities and events come into play. If people want to learn and others want to teach or share their knowledge, we are more than happy to connect you through communities and events like this one today. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have run hundreds of events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, all sorts of different things. In 2022, we made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor community. That does what it says on the tin. You can meet a mentor or you can be a mentor. We're really excited about that, and we're really looking forward to seeing our 5,000th introduction through that community. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you'd like to know more about any of our other communities, again, get in touch with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Slack, and we can take it from there. Also, if you know Helen Lewis or you know Barry, you can get in touch with them too. They'll be able to tell you more about the communities as well. Just to let you know, the recording of today's session will be available on YouTube. I will put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat for you. And just a little warning before we get started, Ryan has been made aware that he may have power outage. So if that happens, we're going to give it 5 minutes. And if he isn't able to then get back, we'll obviously reorganize and reschedule to be able to hear from him. But at the moment, it looks like the snow is holding off and we'll be okay. But just to let you know, we also, yeah, fingers crossed, we also will have time for Q&A at the end of Ryan's talk. So if you have any questions, keep them in mind and you'll be able to ask anything you want at the end of the talk. And with no further ado, I will shush and hand over to Ryan. Over to you.
Hey, thank you, Abby. Let me share my screen, pick the right one. All right, and let's jump in. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Thanks for everybody for joining today. Topic we're going to talk about is one near and dear to my heart, which is runbook automation, and specifically around this concept of self-service runbooks and runbook automation for everyone, not just keeping it to ourselves within our teams. So who am I? I am Ryan Russo. I am a principal solutions architect at Octopus Deploy, where we make both deployment automation and runbook automation software. If you're interested in those topics, especially things around CI, CD, DevOps, platform engineering, and operations, runbooks, those kinds of things, feel free to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's usually the best place to find me these days. If you do send me a connection request, just put a note in like a message along with it that says that you are here with me today talking about runbooks, so I have some context for it. And speaking of context, runbooks, that is the topic today. So we're going to kind of jump in. I'm going to structure this into really two parts. The first part being the why, what are runbooks, and the why you would want to use a runbook automation platform, and then jump into best practices for enabling this concept of self-service runbooks and runbooks for everyone. So that'll be kind of the two parts of this presentation. So let's go ahead and jump in with the first most important question. What are runbooks? If you're not familiar with them, runbooks are At the most generic or the most simplest definition would just be a step-by-step guide on how to complete a routine or emergency task. So a lot of times in the DevOps space, we tend to conflate these with operations runbooks. So things that are more about keeping your applications running smoothly, or how to recover from an emergency or an incident or an outage. That tends to be what most people are talking about when they say runbooks, but it can be more broad and it can be more generic if you want to incorporate other routines, other tasks into that definition, which I think when we do expand this idea out and we get further in and we talk about runbook automation for everyone, opening this up to other teams just besides your dev team and your ops team, you'll probably even think of many examples within your company or within your organization where this would apply even outside the DevOps space. These inside the DevOps space, especially these application maintenance tasks, the emergency tasks, they tend to kind of group up into a few different categories. First one being application maintenance. So anything you need to do within your application or services to keep them running smoothly, cleaning up file systems, restarting services, that kind of thing, maybe changing settings throughout the day for any load that's coming in, and including that if you do have some type of event where you have more load at one point of the day, month, or year, infrastructure management and creation can come into play there. So not only the concept of using tools like Terraform or CloudFormation or Pulumi to create and destroy infrastructure, but also using those tools to scale up as you need, as your applications need more resources to do their job appropriately. There's also disaster recovery and failure management, kind of getting into the emergency side of runbooks. So, if you do have an event where your main data center is down or your main cloud region's down, how do you recover from that? What steps do you take to get your application back up and running? As well as if you are in the SaaS space, if you have different clients for your application that either have shared a discrete infrastructure, you may have some onboarding processes. How do you take a customer that was just bought into your application or your product suite and get them set up with all the appropriate application services, information that is needed? And I've been talking about these kind of just as processes that you run, things that you need to do when a event happens. The generic idea of a runbook, that step-by-step guide, I'm really at this point talking about manual runbooks or at most semi-scripted processes, right? And we will talk about automating them. That's kind of the goal, is to get them automated so that we can turn them over to other teams for our other colleagues for them to use, but they don't have to be automated to begin with. A lot of these start out as manual processes, maybe scripts that are run or what have you. And they take many different forms. You may find them in a variety of places. Maybe even within your own team, you have some processes, some runbooks that are in Word documents or Google Docs, maybe in wiki pages, maybe just on a script stored on my machine or your machine, or if you're lucky, stored in source control. Now, there are some, definite downsides to these formats, besides not being automated, and being manual. Some of the downsides is these are hard to discover. It's hard to find these processes or even know that they exist when you're trying to do a certain task or fix a certain issue or recover from a certain incident. If you don't know where to find them, how can you be expected to execute these processes? If you do find them, if they're in a Word document or a wiki page, what's the last updated date on that document? Are you confident that they are going to work the same way? I know one of my past lives, a team I worked on, it was kind of the what we call the Boy Scout rule, where the last person who comes in makes sure that everything's tidy. If you used a runbook and it was out of date, it was kind of up to you to make it up to date, which is a good rule in general, but one that's not really easy to enforce and one that is definitely easy to forget. So you may find that even though you can find the runbooks, they may be out of date, and you may not know the necessary steps to even update them or find the right person to update them. If you do get past those issues, you may not even have the right access. Do you have permission to go on to a specific system or a specific environment to actually perform these actions? Maybe, maybe not. That's kind of the difficulties that you can run into with these formats. The other things that will kind of characteristics of runbooks, if you're looking for examples outside of your team, especially when we're in the operations or DevOps space, these runbooks tend to be owned, or I guess the best examples of these tend to be owned and executed by your operation team or your SREs. So if you are looking for some inspiration of where these may be used in your company or things that you may be able to take advantage of in a self-service format, you could definitely reach out to that team and see what is available there. An interesting aspect of this, especially when we talk about different teams kind of growing their own runbooks organically, and especially expanding that idea of runbooks kind of outside the scope of an application, what you'll find sometimes is different teams, for example, like a support team and your ops team may have independently come to the same process or a similar process. So you do also end up with potentially a lot of duplication across teams where you're not necessarily have the tooling in place to share those runbooks or share that knowledge across teams. Some examples of requests or scenarios that have a runbook backing them that can be improved through some runbook automation. And I'm pulling some of these examples from scenarios that I either participated in or pretty familiar with. Run through a few examples. The first one being a sales team or a training team coming to you and saying, hey, can you refresh the demo system with the latest data or the latest code? This is a pretty common request, especially for me in one of my previous roles. And it was often handed over to a newer member of the team. One of the more junior members of the team would often be tasked with this. And there was a process in place. There was a Word document that was about 10 pages long, and it had different tags for each section that kind of said what the section applied to. So it wasn't just a runbook for fixing the demo system or the training system. It also incorporated other systems, development, test, UAT, and even production deployments. But each section kind of applied to, well, this section only applies to demo, or this section only applies to production. So even though we had a process, it ended up turning into kind of a like choose your own adventure runbook, which was hard to follow and hard to maintain. Also hard to execute and took a lot of time. We often would get these requests in with like 30 minutes before a big presentation. And unfortunately, sometimes it took way more than 30 minutes to actually perform this action. The next scenario is finding out through a contractual obligation that you aren't testing or need to test your DR process more regularly. This is something that should have a runbook backing it, some type of documentation on how to switch to your disaster recovery system and how to switch back effectively without losing any data. You shouldn't just be doing this because it is contracted. By the way, this is something you should be doing regularly to make sure that your DR process is working. If you're taking the time and investing the time and money to have a DR system, you should definitely don't want the first time you use the process to be in production, right? You want to test it multiple times before you ever need it, and hopefully never need it. But we know these things do happen. And especially because these types of events, a DR process, depending on your application and your infrastructure and architecture, those tend to happen after hours, either late at night, early in the morning, or on weekends. So you'd want this process to be very efficient and take as little time as possible, but at the same time, being reliable and robust and building confidence that when you do need to do it, it will work for you. The next scenario is probably the one of my favorites, but one we'll use for the rest when we kind of walk through the best practices and talk about how to implement some of these patterns for self-service runbooks. Is, hey, this website, our application, our service is having problems. It's slow, it's flaky, it's crashing, any number of nails solved by the golden hammer of restarting the service or website, right? And this is another one that, you probably have, if it's not, this is one that I think is more likely to not be written down. Just somebody on the team knows which machines to log into. They have the right access to log into those machines or to remotely run a script against those machines to perform this action. The downside of this is, or a downside of this is, it's a distraction. It is context switching. Similar with having to refresh a training system or a demo system. You're stopping your normal task, whatever that happens to be, I imagine for a lot of people in the audience, writing code, building applications. I'm stopping my work of building this application to go restart something in production or in a training system. And then I have to context switch back into my normal flow. And we know how detrimental context switching can be, especially in our type of work. So what can we do? How can we improve these requests? Or maybe to put it a better way, how can we improve how we handle these types of requests? And this is where I'll introduce not only automation, but this idea I've been calling capital R Runbooks. So not just runbook in the sense that it is a process that is to be followed, but it's also automated. And not just automated, because there are a lot of ways you can automate it. Some teams execute runbooks from their CI servers because it's the only tool they have to run scripted processes for them. So they'll have Jenkins or TeamCity or GitHub Actions, et cetera, performing these runbooks on their behalf, which will work to an extent, but it is not ideal because these tools aren't built for the purpose of runbook automation. And what you end up with is missing features, missing security patterns or security features that you need for separating who can run runbooks in specific environments, or just a UX experience that is not compatible or what you would want out of a runbook tool. These tools are great at CI. They tend to be okay, but not as great at things outside of CI. I've also seen teams build their own runbook tools. So a lot of teams do this pattern of homegrown tools, which I think is a better solution than CI servers in some cases, because you do have a tool that is purpose-built for runbooks, and it's most likely built with your team's exact needs in mind. So it's probably going to be like the best possible fit for your team. But if you wanted to take that tooling and move it outside of your team, it'd be more difficult because maybe it's not meeting the needs of your dev team or your ops team or your sales team. There's also the maintenance component. I actually saw this with a team that I worked with where the entire support team for a company lived in a homegrown tool that they had access to over 200 runbook processes, and that it was all automated. Everything was run for them. Could not do their jobs without it. It was critical for this company, but it was a homegrown tool. It had one maintainer, and he had been building it himself for 15 years while he was working at the company. And then he retired, which left the whole future of this application that this whole division of a company depended on kind of up in the air, which is not a great situation to be in. Definitely adds a level of uncertainty if you don't know how you're going to continue maintaining an application like that. So this is where runbook automation platforms come in. True capital R runbooks, the best available runbook automation is going to be unlocked by tooling built for that purpose. Octopus Deploy is one of those. PagerDuty makes Rundeck. IBM has a runbook product. There's likely dozens others out there. So there are options. So if this is something you're interested in, there are options out there for you to try. They're all going to do it a little bit differently. They're going to have their own feature sets and their own patterns and paradigms. But in general, the things that I'm sharing with you today should be able to be applied to any runbook automation platform that you end up choosing. So what should you be getting with a runbook automation platform? You should be getting centralized and standardized runbook scripts and processes. So one system that contains all of your runbooks, not having to go to Google Drive for these or going to Confluence for these or GitHub for these. You shouldn't even have to log into source control at all to be able to use a runbook automation platform, at least to execute the runbooks within them. And you should be able to standardize. And that comes from one, having a single tool to store them, but also having multiple teams use that system, build up their knowledge, and then share the knowledge of how they build their runbooks and use their runbooks across those different teams. Automation is a big key component of this. Machines are always going to run scripts better than people can, which I think is a very good thing. So we should utilize it as much as we can. And in this case, through the automation, you're going to reduce the time it takes to execute these processes and increase the reliability. The fewer manual steps you have, the fewer human interactions in the process you have, the more reliable that process can be. So take that example we had earlier of a request coming in to refresh the data in a sales system, a demo system, or training system. If this is automated and there's one specific runbook for doing that is automated, that probably can be done within 30 minutes, depending on all the details of what that process looks like, but way faster than me running through a 10-page Word doc and trying to piece out which parts of the puzzle I need to apply. You'll also get better security models and audit records. Again, the audit in this part being centralized, having one system where everybody runs or executes their runbooks, you'll be able to see one place, audit history, a record of all of those being executed by who and the outcomes of those events, outcomes of those runbook runs. And through that security model, because you are using a runbook specific tool, it should give you the ability to give permissions to run runbooks for certain teams in specific environments. I know this talk is runbook automation for everyone, and I'll probably say this again later, but this is not necessarily runbook automation for everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's what really makes sense for your company. Some things you can give your support team access to run these in production, or your sales team to run in the demo environment. You don't necessarily have to give everybody the keys to production, unless that works for you and your company, because that would end up being an option. But you definitely want that granularity to be able to separate those out. And once you have these three things, you get to really the key to a runbook automation platform, the thing that I think is the most important that these platforms give you. And that's the ability to enable self-service runbooks, the ability for your coworkers, for the different teams that you work with, and even yourself, because you make requests as well. I have made requests several times, like previous life, I requested a Jenkins project because I didn't have access to make my own, and I had to wait a number of days for a Jenkins project to be created for me. And that's time that I missed out, like not working. That was time that the person who created it had to stop what they were doing, or not do something else to create a Jenkins project, which can definitely be automated. So all of these requests that cause disruptions, cause distractions from people, cause wait times because somebody has to get to it and maybe only a few specific people can do it, are great candidates for self-service runbooks, putting that into someone else's hand. For example, going back to my restart website, our service is going bad, it's flaky, connection errors, 500s, customers are complaining. Now we can put in a request for me to fix it because I have production access for now. Or what if we had a screen that somebody could come to that lists out the runbooks, the actions they have access to, and they can use the search feature, or they can kind of scan through and see that, hey, I have access to restart website. And it gives them details, what it does, what it affects, like what it resolves. And not only do they have access to that, there's even a very convenient run button next to the description there. So instead of putting in that request and waiting for me to action it, we can put this back into the hands of the other teams and give them access to fulfill these requests themselves. So this is really what I consider the dream state of your runbook automation platform, having a list of very common tasks, very repetitive tasks that you can not only automate, but give people power, empower them to come in to run these actions as needed. But we got to get there first, right? We can't just like build it. We can't just create a simple runbook that does a restart. We have to apply some best practices before we get to this point so that we're confident in what we're building and what we're enabling people to use. So we'll walk through some best practices, laying the foundation for these self-service runbooks. These come from a blog post from my colleague, which I'll have links to that I can share as well. It'll go into a decent amount of detail, but I'm going to cover these best practices on how you build a runbook start to finish that you can enable for self-service. And I'll pick on myself. I'll show you my first simple runbook, my first pass, my first draft of the Restart website runbook. And it's not bad. It does exactly what it says. It actually does a little more because it has 2 steps. It restarts the website, and then it makes a request to make sure that the restart worked, or maybe more honestly, to warm up the website so the next request comes in clean, but it's part of a verification. So this is, again, pretty simple. It does what it says, but am I really comfortable turning this over to any team, any colleague, and say, I'm comfortable you running this whenever you need? Not yet, not really. So we're going to start with the first best practice, which is actually outside of the process itself. It's the metadata attached to the runbook, and we've already seen it, but it is to describe the runbook. Use the description field or the help text field or whatever it's named in the platform you're using. That field that you, or I'll speak for myself, I usually skip over most of the time. I'm getting better. My New Year's resolution is to not skip any descriptions or help text this year. But use that description field to clarify what your runbook is for. What is it intended to do? How is it used? Maybe who it affects, what it resolves, even put author information in here. Maybe if you have a dedicated team or individual that is responsible for this, that's even something else you can put into the description in cases where somebody has questions about it or needs help with it. So again, that's kind of metadata pre-process best practices for the runbook. The next best practice is actually going to be jumping into the process itself. And we're going to not start with fixing the problem, but inspecting the problem, checking the current state of the application or the system before we take action. In this case, it's making a request to the web application and seeing what status code it responds with. If you're doing infrastructure as code, this could be your Terraform plan. Like, this is my plan for what I'm going to create or destroy. So some type of checking of the current state, some information about the current state before you move to the acting phase. In this case, it does actually, you can see in my screenshot, it is returning a 200, which I guess flaky websites can return a 200. That doesn't necessarily mean a restart won't fix it. But this also may be a sign that my inspect phase isn't quite robust as it needs to be. And I'll use that as an opportunity to kind of just say, like, you should always be iterating on these. Like, the more you find edge cases, the more you find where issues where maybe your inspect isn't collecting enough, or the inspect isn't showing you a problem, but the action still fixes it. Add in more details. If it's a flaky website request, maybe I should be making 10 requests or 20 requests and showing the average responses. Maybe I want to show the response time or show the CPU usage or the memory usage of the application in question. Those are all things that you can capture during this phase and present to the user running the runbook. Once you've inspected the current state, the next step would be to collect more information. And this can actually create a good feedback loop for the inspect state. If you're kind of consistently finding that your inspect phase doesn't find problems, collect some logs from the machine, application logs, web server logs, whatever that ends up being, archive those up and make them available for download for the person using it or the author of the runbook to come back and look at those logs and further diagnose the problem and see whether this runbook even is applicable, or maybe there's a deeper systemic issue that needs to be fixed, or if there's other things that we need to add to inspect to verify that it is in a bad state before we move forward to the fixing phase, the rectify phase. But once we've inspected the current state, once we've collected additional logs or diagnostic information to improve the process, we want to confirm. We want to present the results of the inspect phase to the user and ask them whether they want to proceed with the course of action or not. In this case, it tells me that the web request was successful. Should I keep going? Well, customers are still complaining. I know a restart will likely fix it, so I'll probably keep going. But I can add notes in here that even though the state of the application seems to be good, there are issues that are being reported. And then again, take that back to iterate on this process and make it even better. You can also add in some conditional logic. So if you want to, if in my example, if my website was actually broken and returning a 500 or some other error code, you could potentially skip the confirmation step if the inspect phase, if the inspection of the current state says it's bad, you may not want to confirm. At that point, it's really up to you, but I think you should at least consider having it run all the time, because then that way you can always double check the state manually before you move forward. All right, so we have inspected, we have collected more information, we have done a confirmation phase. Now we're getting back to the original first step of my simple runbook, which is to rectify, which is to fix the problem. Take the action that is the name of the runbook. In this case, restart website. In other cases, backup database, restore backup, or fail over to your DR system. So this is going to be the actual script that goes through and fixes the problem. In this case, we're going to stop the website and restart it. And the next step we do after fixing the problem is the second step I had in my original one, verify. Check that what we've done has actually fixed the problem. What's a good practice to do here is anything that you capture in your inspect phase, also capture in your verify. So you've got essentially the same snapshot before and after the action was taken. So you can see the impact of the action. So the error code before was 500, now it's 200. So we verified that it worked. The memory usage was off the charts before we ran the action. Now it's back down to a normal level. Probably you should look into that more if your memory continues to go up without being reclaimed. But that type of inspection and that type of data collecting in your runbook process can point you in the direction of those long-term fixes. After we verify, so we've done everything. We've done the inspection, gathering, we've done the collecting. We have fixed the problem and verified the state after the fix. The last thing we need to do is tell somebody what we did. Notify key stakeholders or other team members or different teams what happened. This person ran this runbook in this environment. This was the state beforehand, put your inspection results in. This was the action that was taken. This is the state afterhand, put your verification results in. Also include a link back to the more detailed logs with the artifacts that were generated in the collect phase. One thing you want to do here is also have the ability to kind of separate these alerts. You don't necessarily want your lower level environments, your dev and test runbook notifications going to the same channel as your production notifications. You do want them going somewhere because it may give you a different signal, right? If you're restarting your website in your test environment 10 times a day, could be a signal that something's off, but you don't want to cloud your production alerts with that information. So good to separate those channels out. I've got an example of an email here. You should also be able to use email, your favorite chat program, or even text messages or pagers if you want to go that route. So if we take a look at the difference now, there's a few more best practices, but that's the end of the process best practices. So if we take a look at the simple runbook, really 2 steps, restart and verify, and compare that now to our process that follows best practices. We're running through all these steps, inspect, collect. I actually have an extra step that is analyze. This analyzes the inspection data to determine whether I want to confirm or not. In my case, if it returns bad signal, we skip the confirm and go straight into rectify, but then rectify, verify, and notify. A much more robust and complete runbook, something I am comfortable handing over to the general audience to be able to run on their own without any help or any guidelines. We've got guardrails built in. We've got data collection built in. We've got notifications built in. I'm comfortable with anybody running this. Before we hand it over to them, though, we are going to look at the last 2 best practices. One, hopefully, would be something you're doing anyway, but test your runbooks in a lower level environment before you go into production. Don't just make changes and hand it over. Make sure they're always tested in a production-like environment before you give them other teams access to them. And consider automating that test. For example, running your restart website or your backup database or restore database runbook in a lower level environment daily or weekly. The reason for this is not so much to test the actual logic of your runbook, but to defend yourself against any environmental changes that may be happening behind the scenes, a difference in how the application runs or is hosted, a difference in where those statistics may be held or those metrics that you're gathering may be coming from. So just if you get the ability to run something on a schedule, you should find potential environmental issues before they become a problem for somebody trying to run this in a production environment. So that is the end of the best practices that come from our blog post on the topic. I've added a few things here just to kind of highlight, go back to the security model side of things, because I do think that is an important aspect of being able to enable self-service runbooks for these different teams. And that is a security model where you can take a specific team like this application developer group and give them access only to that specific application runbook and a specific environment, whether that's dev test, and production, whatever makes sense for you or your team, but you should be able to make these very granular. Likewise, if I had a centralized QA team, I could give them access to multiple applications, but only in the test environment. So that's a way to take a shared runbook that maybe your ops team or your support team uses in production, but you can turn it over to your QA team or your development teams to use in different environments. Or if you have a pretty high maturity DevOps organization, even your dev team running those in production if they own those apps through production. And lastly, just want to highlight, you should be looking for these logs, right? This builds that confidence in the process itself, but not only the process, but the idea of self-service for these runbooks. So having a log where you can go and see exactly what is happening and who is kicking off these and what the results are, and having that be centralized for all your teams is definitely a key aspect of this. So quite a bit of information about runbooks and runbook automation, especially this idea about self-service runbooks and turning them on for everyone. If you're interested, you don't have this today and you want to implement something like this within your team or your organization, how would I recommend you go about doing that? First step, I would say, is catalog what runbooks you already have, whether those are requests you're making, but I'd say more specifically, especially in a trial phase, requests that are coming in. What is causing your team distractions? What is causing them to context switch? What are those manual processes or semi-automated processes that you would like to put into the hands of your colleagues or your teammates? From there, choose a few runbook automation platforms to trial and figure out which one is the right fit for your team. Once you've done that, done a trial, do a proof of concept, start with the best practices that we've outlined here, that we have the blog post for. Don't start with my Simple Runbook, the one that only does what it says in the name. Go ahead and start with that describe, inspect, collect, etc., so that you know as you're building it, you've got that confidence, you've got that reliability built in. Use them internally first. Don't finish the best practices and say, yes, they are ready to go. Use them internally as you fill those requests. It can transform from a manual, I have to go follow this Word doc or this Confluence or run these scripts, to I have to go click this button, and use that as your testing field. Okay, am I getting the same results? Am I getting better results? Because it's automated and it's maybe even doing things that you're not doing today because you're not collecting the logs because it's not easy to, or you don't have access. Once you have used them internally, nominate a pilot group from one of your teams that you work with to give them access to run these on a self-service basis. Instead of reaching out to you to perform this action, they can take it on themselves. From there, it's a matter of iterating. So get that feedback from that pilot group add that feedback into your runbook runs, add more runbooks to your catalog that they can choose from, and then expand from that pilot group out to a general audience. And then the last one is also expand beyond your team. Take the things that you've learned, the knowledge you've gained, the benefits, the time savings that you've gained from a automation platform, and share that with the support team, the ops team, the sales team, whatever teams you're not on that can also benefit from these practices. So that is the presentation in a nutshell. Thank everybody for joining. I've appreciated you coming and spending your evening with me. I know it is kind of late in the UK. It is just past noon here in the US. So I definitely enjoy sharing these time zones with you and sharing this time with you. At this point, we will open it up for any questions that have come along, and I'll turn it back over to Abby past that. I just have to find the chat to see. I haven't seen any
questions so far while you've been speaking, but if anybody does have a question, feel free to either put it on the chat or unmute and ask. That's absolutely fine. I'll just give it a few moments for you to do that, just in case anyone's wanting to.
You asked for that.
I did ask for it, Nikita. Go for it.
So Runbooks. So Runbooks basically, they allow you to automate a ton of DevOps tasks, especially regarding systems restoration, configuration, and so on, right?
That's right. Yeah. And they're in general, when we're talking about DevOps or an operations runbook, they tend to be tied to application or infrastructure management. But at a more general level, it could be any process that you follow that you'd want to automate within your team.
So the question will be, three of first questions. Everything breaks. So can you back up runbooks? So let's say you create a perfect runbook, then somebody misclicks a button and half of the cloud is dead. So how can I revert back? If somebody, let's say if you create a complicated structure in your runbook, which I think is possible, like a really robust process, and then how do you make sure it's backed up so it's protected against human error, which will come one day?
Okay, so you're saying the process itself, how do we back up the process so that it doesn't become damaged? There's a few ways to do that, and it will depend on the platform that you end up choosing. Config as code as an option, being able to store those processes as scripts, or being able to store them as scripts using maybe a Terraform provider or an API request. So storing those scripts in an external system, but executing them from your runbook platform. The exact details will depend on the platform itself.
And then the second question is, do I understand correctly that you need to be very careful about where you store your runbook? Because if I was a hacker, I will be interested in your system, in runbooks configs, even more than in the systems beneath it, because that will show me the truth about how the organization works, what are your fallback processes, and so on. So, I would assume that storing runbooks configs in the secure places should be part of your security strategy.
Right. Yeah. The platform that you're using should have security, different security methods enabled. And that kind of goes back to the previous question you had about how do I prevent runbook process from being damaged. You can also separate the permissions on who can edit versus who can run. So maybe who can author and edit runbooks should be very different from who's able to run them. So that should be part of the platform. But yeah, if you have your, I think this is similar with a lot of different automation systems where you are passing the permission off, where I don't need keys to production anymore, because my runbook platform or my CI platform or my CD platform has that. You have to take great steps in, one, choosing a reputable product, a company that has a history of that compliance. But even then, I mean, no system is unhackable, unfortunately. So you'll want to have those notifications built in, secure who has access to which parts of the system, and going back to that audit log, setting up alerts if anything looks out of place.
Thank you. And the last question, and sorry, I'm just doing my security course. That's why all the questions about how to protect people. So you mentioned, or rather your docs mentioned, that the runbooks, they support emergency operations tasks like website failover and restoration. My question will be, how do you test these emergency operation tasks? How do you know in advance that it will work correctly?
Yeah, and that's something you will have to test it in a production-like environment and eventually use it in production. So kind of going back to that example of, I have a manual process for failing over to my DR system. How do you know it works until you use it? You will have to run it at some point. And kind of goes back to, if you don't have contracts that require you to test your DR process on a regular basis, you should have an internal requirement to test that on a regular basis, where you use that runbook to fail over and then use the same process to fail back to make sure that it works.
Good. And the last question, and then everybody else can ask. I can keep generating questions till the morning. So I've noticed that Octopus Deploy is present at GitHub, and you have quite an impressive number of projects, I think 204, and it's a verified profile, so I think it's you. So if somebody wants to learn more about Octopus Deploy, and especially Runbooks, would you recommend these people to join your community on GitHub and maybe find out how to help you?
Community on GitHub would be one place to join. Also, we have a community Slack, which I think is on the event page. Joining there, we have a few thousand people in there that you can chat about. And then also, you can also reach out to us. We're pretty friendly people. We like to talk DevOps and automation as well.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Questions, friends?
We do have another question in the chat as well, Ryan. So first of all, Tony says, thanks for the talk. He said also, in your experience and context, when you were trying to get runbooks in place, what was the smallest step or change towards having them that made the biggest impact?
Yeah, for me, that's actually interesting. If I go back to the days before working at Octopus, I actually was a customer. I used Octopus along with TeamCity to automate our builds and deployments. And it's a similar story. So it's not necessarily runbook specific, but it was a small step of, how can I take our deployments, which are pretty manual and pretty annoying and pretty broken, and make them automated and get the best use out of this tool. And it was starting with the smallest application, so just one of our websites, and then only to the test environment or only to the development environment. Once that's working, then you kind of build out around there. It's like, okay, do I work on getting it to work in the test environment and eventually work up to production, or do I add in how to do our database deployments or how to do our service deployments? So you start with kind of like something that will help you, but the smallest bit. And I think you can apply that same thing to runbooks. And it's probably a little bit easier with runbooks because they can be a lot more granular than a deployment. Deployment is like, we got to deploy everything, all our apps, all our services, our database, and all that. Find that task that is annoying you the most, something that you have to stop and do frequently. And if you've already scripted it, you're most of the way there. You just need a tool where you can put that script in, parameterize it, and have it run against your infrastructure for you. So I would kind of start with that, the smallest task that you do frequently that you either can automate quickly or you already have a script to add in.
I guess if I may, I'll ask a follow-up question as well.
Yep, sure.
What was the kind of, so a lot of it is, in my mind, collating what's already there, like you just said, right? If there's already scripts there, get them together, get them in there, make them make sense together. But a lot of people might not see how useful that would be. So I'm wondering, what kind of pushback would you get when you start saying, I would like a runbook, or we need a runbook?
So are you saying like anticipating pushback for adopting a system like this at all, or for specific runbooks within the system?
So yeah, so if you actually start saying, okay, we need a run book, my team's going to trial this out, and then we'll report to someone what are the things that they come back to you and say, forget that, features, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I understand now. Yes, great question. Thank you. And it's going to depend a little bit based on like who you're selling it to, right? Like who you have to convince. If it's your manager and they're saying features, you don't need to implement this runbook system. But this runbook system, if you're in a scenario that I was in before, like and maybe you may find that runbooks don't necessarily apply to your team, but they may apply to other teams like your ops team or somebody within your company. But for me, there were a lot of tasks that pulled me away from development. I wanted to be writing features, but I had to go fix this issue, fix that issue. You end up in a situation where you can be pulled in a lot of directions. So if they want you to build more features, you can point them to say, hey, this will save me. I do this task X number of times. It takes me 30 minutes every time I do it. With a click of a button, I can either do it faster or other people can do it without my intervention. That gives me more time to build features, or even at a base level, go into, I spend 4 hours a week building these requests. That is X times the number of pounds you pay me per hour. And then that can also help sell to management where you have a ROI on what this tool will gain you. And it should be pretty apparent, like after using it for a while, like, hey, we don't actually do these requests anymore. People are doing them themselves. Or if we are still doing it, it's only 10 minutes a week versus 4 hours a week or 8 hours a week that you're having to handle these tasks.
Awesome, thank you.
I had a question as well. Yeah, thanks for the talk. Very interesting. A lot of the
Is it me? Did I freeze?
No, I think Michael's frozen.
May I ask a question while Michael is unfreezing? So Runbook, it's a part of Octopus Deploy. Is there a free version? Is it free? Like, so what is your business model? Is there like free version and I buy support, or how does it work?
Not a free version for Octopus. I'm not sure about other tools if they have free versions or not. We do have a community version for open source projects to use. But our pricing model is based on the infrastructure that you manage. So the number of web servers you're executing deployments or runbooks to, or Kubernetes clusters or cloud targets.
So you have a community version which can be used in open source projects, right?
That's right, yeah.
But this is big. It means that like every maintainer of, let's say, Finos of Apache incubator projects, they can just come to you and create a massive good stuff because, wow, this is huge. You should start with it. This is really huge. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to hear that it's of interest.
Of course, free stuff. So basically a lot of developers, like the very best ones, a lot of them will be involved in open source one way or another. Like Apache itself, it doesn't make money. If I understand correctly, they have companies paying organizing and stuff. So so somebody could sell it to the manager saying that, look, there's Apache project I'm working in, and we are spending that much money in open source product, that much money and resources, and then we applied it to, let's say, Apache Spark, and now it works like that. Maybe I don't know, maybe it works with GitHub Actions or something. So, and our project is similar to those open source projects, so we can assume that the savings will be similar. So, would you like to buy Tesla in the end of the year for each in the management team? Something like this.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Michael, are you unfrozen and able to ask your question if you want to still? You can go for it.
Yeah, sure. My laptop crashed. That's the second time during this Zoom call that it's crashed. I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think what I was asking was, yeah, the runbooks I come across are often a series of investigative steps because something's gone wrong somewhere. And these are the things to check step by step, check this, check that, check the other, but not necessarily something that is like, you know, do this. So in that sort of scenario, is there, can this sort of thing, like something like Octopus Deploy or something similar, be useful?
Yeah, I think so. Especially if they're the same steps over and over. So essentially you're describing like the inspect and the collect phase, but there may not necessarily be a rectify phase or a verify phase afterwards. You're just collecting the information to go and fix something. That is a perfect use for a runbook. The best practices are good in general, but there are some cases where it doesn't make sense to collect logs or to even fix something if the whole goal of the runbook is just to go and collect some information or go and clean up some file system or something like that, clean up old infrastructure.
And in your example, I think so you showed like the collection of logs as being part of the investigate stage. Could something like Octopus Deploy help you to check dashboards as well? Or how does that tie in to Octopus Deploy if that's something that you need to do?
Check dashboard in what sense? Like just check the state of like
Like
a
the
system.
memory usage. Like it might be one of the things something's gone wrong and I need to investigate. I need to look at the memory usage of some pod or something like that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you're pulling that information from. So you mentioned pod, so Kubernetes, I'm thinking. So it could be your runbook is running a kubectl command to gather that information versus checking it in Prometheus or something directly. Though if there is a system that has those metrics and it has an API, you could certainly also make a API call out to some external system, be like, hey, go give me the memory usage for this application ID. And that could be part of your collection phase.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for coming and sharing some of what you know. And thank you, everybody, for asking questions and discussing. It's really great to have some participation. If you do want to continue any conversation, as Ryan said, feel free to ping him a message and he can obviously continue to chat with you directly about anything else you want to know. It's always good to put a little message in when you go on LinkedIn, isn't it? Just so that he knows you're not like some stranger, but that he's met you at this event. So please do that if you want to continue discussion. But all that's left for me to say today is thank you so much, Ryan, for coming and presenting and sharing some of what you know. I'm really glad that the snow did not stop your power halfway through your talk. That's amazing. And I'm very excited about that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I really look forward to seeing you at our next LJC event, which you will find out about in due course, of course, when we've got them all up and running and planned. So thank you so much. Have a great evening and we will see you soon. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, Abby. Amazing
Bye.
stuff. Thank you. Bye.